So, first of all, what is ecstatic in this context? What do we mean? So, when we think about the idea of ecstasy or an ecstatic state, we think of something that is open and expansive and euphoric and uplifting and kind of transcendent and elevating. And in this context, it is all of those things. But when we think about ecstatic states, we probably also think of them as something that happens spontaneously in response to something that's pleasurable, something that is what we want, something beautiful, like it's almost happiness on spiritual steroids. The truth of it is that the ecstatic state is something that happens within the soul as a capacity, an inner ability of the soul to respond to something. It is not about what happens to the soul, whether it is positive or apparently negative. There is this sense with soulful ecstatic states that it can arise in response to anything or even everything when we get advanced enough on the path, because it is this creative expression, this capacity that the soul has. So that sounds like a really good thing. Who wouldn't want to feel expanded and uplifted, even when something happens that we really don't want, that we would prefer to have avoided? So let's just consider how we might strengthen this capacity in the soul and what that might be like. So there are two simple ways that we can start to do this. And one is through openness and one is through intention. So openness, first of all, openness is basically saying, okay, I might have hope and attachment that things go this way, or I might have fear and aversion that I don't want things to go that way. But no matter what happens, I will hold the space and remain open to see what the meaning could be, to allow for the revelation of the deeper potential to show itself. So, in this process, there is a sense that we know we're going to have our preferences. We know that there's an advanced teaching, probably we know this in tantric wisdom, that says all tastes are the same and everything has the same taste. So there is no such thing as something that is good and something that is bad and so on and so forth. But when we're working with samsaric or dualistic vision, which is where we see we are separate and we see people as being separate or events as being positive or negative, we have compassion and we recognize, okay, that's tricky. It feels very true. I understand these tantric enlightened saints might have this realization, but not quite there yet. So what am I going to do in the here and now? How can I maybe make progress towards that? And also, how can I have less suffering about not having my attachments or desires fulfilled in the way that I think I want them fulfilled in that moment? Like when that doesn't happen, it might be painful or disappointing or cultivate, a sense of defeat in the mind. How do I avoid that? Because it basically sucks. So the way that you can do that is say, okay, I'm going to be open, just see what might come of this. I might not like it in the instance. It might not be my preference, for example, but I will see. And if there is something that happens that is your preference, rather than deciding that we're just going to be so happy about that and then feeling miserable when it doesn't turn out exactly the way that you thought it would, doesn't, what's the expression? A proverbial wooden nickel, you think it's going to be something, it's not. So regardless, you say, okay, I'm just going to be open. Let's see what we can experience through this, what the revelation will be. And that leads us to the intention. So the intention is being open and knowing and intending that you will receive the clarity on that revelation. The intention is, I will work with this, I will understand this, I will process this, and I will receive whatever the hidden wisdom or genius or opportunity in this is, even though in my initial state of preference or not preference or liking or not liking, I may not be able to see that. In fact, I probably won't. So I'm going to be open and I'm going to hold intention that the truth will be revealed. Now, when we're in this, we can remember two things. We can say we participate and we process with presence. So we participate by processing with presence. And that's the first kind of reminder. Okay, if I want to work through this, if If I want to utilize openness and intention, I participate by processing with presence. So I don't judge, I don't pull away, I don't do anything, I just accept it and move through it. That's the first thing. Another way that we can kind of strengthen this awareness in the mind is playing with this idea. We create space for grace to show its face. So space, we don't judge and shut it down, we stay open. Space, grace, the revelation, the hidden meaning, the hidden potential, that we can utilize this experience in order to find something that is of use, of benefit for the soul. And then face is that revelation, that clarity. It's like the face is the form. So it shows up in our lives in some way. We've metabolized it with enough creativity, perhaps even ecstatic or euphoric creativity, where we say, I'm going to work with this and I'm going to get in there and do my ritual or go through my healing process and connect with the deities, do the spiritual practice. Maybe it's just beautiful, just exquisite, even though what drew you into that space is difficult. And often I've found in my own experience that the things that are the most heartbreaking or the most challenging to deal with open us up the most deeply simultaneously to divine presence and ecstasy, because we are just in that really broken, open state. You can perhaps relate to this. Now, it doesn't mean you have to be miserable in order to be ecstatic. That's in dualistic vision, but it does mean that there is possibility in going through the pain of accessing a very, very deep gift. And that's that openness and that intention that allows you to do this. So then we have this notion of creativity in a slightly different way to what we might initially think of it. So creativity in the more artistic way of poetry and drawing, singing, dance, music, and so on. All of these things are very useful ways to express, and they're part of our community. It's so important that we nurture the space for each one of us to find our own expression and develop that, because that's connected to this idea of the soul's creativity in a more expansive sense. But what we're talking about in this discourse is the expansive sense of the soul's creativity as an expression of consciousness and working with energy in a very pragmatic way. Working with energy can sound a bit kind of floaty, or a bit, oh, I'm working with my energy. But no, when you when you're actually doing it, it is a thing. It's real. And in working with the energy, we actually train our mind and our body to hold the space for responsiveness rather than shutting it down with reaction. So responding is spacious, reaction is automatic based on preconceived ideas. This is happening, I recognize it from the past, or something, say, I don't want this. Responsiveness is, this is happening, holding space, moving through it with more presence. And the creative facet or expression of the soul requires presence. It can't happen in judgment. It can't happen in reactivity. There's just no space for it. It's like trying to be open and closed at the same time. It doesn't work in the soul. You need to have openness for that creativity to be able to rise up and manifest. So this idea of non-judgment is really important. And again, let's just recognize there'll be things that we like and things that we don't, but we can apply the understanding that sometimes, you know, that expression, someone dodged a bullet. So like you don't get what you want. You thought you really wanted it. Later on, you realize something that you didn't know at the time and you think, oh my God, I really thank heavens I didn't get that. Thank you. You know, you're on your knees, thanking the universe for the same thing that you might have been praying for, you know, a week ago or 3 months ago or whatever it is. But there is this understanding that the revelation, so space for grace to show its face, the revelation comes later. And because you were willing to work through the process and not shut it down, you're able to not only receive that clarity that, hey, we're actually looking out for you with that, which is like, oh, thank you for that. I didn't know. But also that there is this process that you can move through that develops other things that are positive as well. So for you, that could have been in that situation, maybe patience or insight or a sense of humor, who knows, many things, a realization of deeper gratitude for the protectiveness inherent in your connection with the deity, for example. So there's many ways that that can show up. And I think in this, there's also a sense of freedom that's enhanced. So you don't have to worry so much about needing to make judgments in the interim. It's really just showing up and saying, what are we working with today? What are we working with in this moment? It might seem a little bit counterintuitive to think about keeping our minds open, especially if we're talking about experiences that are painful. So, our natural instinct tends to be something hurts, we pull away. Think of that, those little creatures, the little bugs that kind of roll into a ball to protect themselves. I remember once I lived in a place that it was kind of like nestled into a rainforest grove, and I would get lots of those little creepy crawlies that would come into the house, and I'd kind of scoop them up on a piece of paper and take them off the carpet and just put them outside the door in the kind of rockery area where they would be, much more at home and less likely to get attacked by my cat, for example, or stood on intentionally by me. Horrible. So I do that. But what would sometimes happen is that they would sense, the paper going underneath them, even if I was like super careful with it. And then they'd roll up into a defensive ball. And then it was a nightmare for both of us. Like, they were rolling and I was trying to keep them on the paper and not drop them and get the door open. And anyway, it just made things so much more difficult. And I was always struck by how that very natural and understandable defensive instinct could sometimes just get in the way. And it doesn't mean that we allow ourselves to abandon any notion of self protection. It's just understanding self protection in a slightly different way, I think, and allowing ourselves to evolve in our idea of that so that it could actually be protective to be completely present and actually see what's happening with as much courage as we can muster. Sometimes we just can't do it in the moment, and let's all just be kind to the mind and to each other and recognize sometimes we need a while to be able to crank one eye open and have a look at what's happening and then maybe open the other, and that's all right. But understanding that eventually being able to open our eyes and see things clearly when we're ready is actually a way to move through it and process and work with our energy and ignite or activate our creativity and perhaps even access some ecstatic experience through that process. And of course, just touching back on the idea of ecstatic as transcendent, uplifting, expansive, it's not just about pleasure, it's actually about transformation. It's actually about being able to hold such a state that that experience becomes revealed as something else. And there's kind of this beautiful sense of revelation in that, where the foe might become the friend, and the things that you feared might actually become very different in your vision. So our whole notion of life and the universe, especially if it's been quite scarred because of earlier experiences of betrayal or abandonment and disappointment, can begin to soften and transform. We might actually begin to see the world and experience ourselves and our own projections in a really different way. And that can bring a lot of relief and a lot of freedom.